1935, two men sat in a kitchen in Akron, Ohio. One was a New York stockbroker named Bill Wilson, who had been hospitalized 4 times for alcoholism and had been told by his doctor that his case was hopeless, that he would either go insane or die from his drinking. The other was a surgeon named Bob Smith, who had been drinking heavily for 17 years and whose medical career was on the verge of collapse. They talked for hours. What was unusual about that conversation was not what they talked about, it was how. Wilson wasn't trying to fix Smith. He wasn't lecturing him on the consequences of his drinking or urging him to exercise more willpower. He was sharing his own experience, describing his own descent, talking about what it actually felt like from the inside. The compulsion, the shame, the repeated failures to stop despite genuine desire to do so. Smith stayed sober after that conversation. Wilson had been sober for 6 months. And from that kitchen table conversation, Alcoholics Anonymous was born, a peer-supported model that would eventually reach tens of millions of people worldwide and would influence addiction treatment more profoundly than almost any clinical intervention that followed it. What those two men discovered intuitively in 1935 is something that research has been confirming ever since. Substance use disorders are not moral failures. They are not a willpower problem. They are complex conditions involving neurobiological changes, psychological patterns, social context, and critically, a recovery process that is rarely linear and almost never happens alone. Today, we're going to teach you the clinical and diagnostic framework you need for the license exam, and we're going to build it on the foundation that Bill Wilson and Bob Smith stumbled onto in that Akron kitchen. That understanding and connection are more powerful than judgment. Welcome to Licensure Lifeline, the podcast that helps you build clinical knowledge and confidence to pass your exam and grow as a clinician. I'm Matt, and today we're covering substance use disorder, one of the most clinically urgent and most testable domains on every major license exam. This is also one of the more significant areas for my practice. About a quarter of the people I work with are struggling with substance use, and I have a ton of experience in this area. It's a great area to work in. I really enjoy watching people change their lives in this area. So this is what I want you to know before we get started. The content isn't abstract for many of the people who will sit in front of you. Substance use disorder touches nearly every family in America. Your clients will present with active use, with recovery, with co-occurring disorders, with shame that has been accumulating for years. Knowing this content isn't just about passing your exam. It's about being prepared to actually help these individuals, right? Today, we cover 4 frameworks: the DSM-5 criteria for substance use disorders, Proshka's and DiClemente's trans-theoretical model, which, again, is highly, highly used, a really important model to know, the stages of change there. And then the major approaches and co-occurring disorders, that's it's just going to be part of the clinical reality here. I actually got into alcohol use from the eating disorder world because it was just such a prevalent thing that I saw with people struggling with eating disorders. So you get a lot of these co-occurring types of issues that people are looking to improve their lives around. Before we get started, I have been working on updating and renovating the website. LicensureLifeline.com has got a full facelift. If you've never been there and visited before, please go take a look. I would love feedback. I would love you to really take a look at it. There is a new feature on there. I've actually created a diagnostic test that you can take. It's 30 questions. It lets you really take a look at areas of strengths, areas of weaknesses that you might have. Just click on the Study Pulse link in the navigation menu at the very top of the screen. It'll take you right to the exam. It is supposed to email you your results afterwards, so you'd have to enter your email. Let me know if that works. It took me a while to figure that one out. Also, don't forget about the newsletter. That thing is growing more than I expected it to. It's really great to see. But, this is going to be something that you get weekly along with the podcast that is just going to do a deeper dive into the topics that I cover in the podcast. And it's a free resource. So, it's completely free to you. Take a look. I'm really hoping that it's just become something that you can add to your study habits. Lastly, the Circle group. Thank you so much for everybody that has come into this group. This is something that has been definitely a labor of love for me. It's so cool to see this growing. I really plan to have something for these founding members that I'm seeing come into the group. So you stay tuned for that. That's something I'm probably going to announce at the end of this month. But I just want to thank everybody that's joined so far. Take a look. If you haven't taken a look at the Circle group yet, I'll have the link in the show notes. But this is a space that again, is just going to support you with your studying. You get free 2 weeks when you join just to take a look. You don't have to put a credit card down or anything like that. You can just join for 2 weeks for free. You can cancel anytime. But this space is going to be, we have quizzes in there. We have, there's like study guides in there. I've created this thing that shows all the different licensure requirements for all the different states. I also host a study hall every Friday where I just go live, talk about the topic of the week, but then also just take questions. If you want to come in and just have somebody to talk to about your experience with the test or just run some things by me, that's what I'm there for. I take the hour and I just sit there and talk about these things. So I really enjoy that aspect of it. I really enjoy being there for people. All right, let's get into the news. The SAMHSA announced more than $280 million in funding opportunities for 15 grant programs this month. Investments advancing substance use disorder treatment, overdose prevention, trauma-informed care, integrated care, and behavioral health workforce development. Many of these grant programs fund the community mental health settings where a lot of pre-licensed therapists work. Certified community behavioral health clinics, recovery support programs, first responder training. These are your future workplaces. And in those settings, substance use disorders are not a specialty referral. They are the presenting concern for so many people, often alongside depression, anxiety, trauma. So this investment signals that behavioral health workforce needs to be equipped to address the substance abuse and use problems that we just see in these different communities. This is a huge area, and I'm so glad to see that money is going into it. It's really interesting how federal funding goes for a lot of these community programs. They just get cut and put back in and cut and put back in. Meanwhile, all the politicians will always say like how significant mental health is for their communities. After significant tragedies that they experience, that's one of the first things they say. Yet, they're not consistent with funding these programs. So again, this is probably another area that we need to advocate even more for to make sure these programs are funded. It's just going to support people. Next up, the DEA and HHS finalized permanent authorization of telemedicine for buprenorphine prescribing, and removing one of the last pandemic-era uncertainties and allowing patients to begin treatment for opioid use disorder without an in-person visit. This is amazing. One of the biggest barriers to people getting treatment is geography, and then, it's just the sense of that oftentimes shame that people feel showing up to these places and getting the support they need. So something like this is just going to do amazingly well for individuals that need this. So especially when you think of people in like rural areas, like it's so important. And I've said this before in this podcast. That was one of the really wonderful things about going telehealth with individuals is I got to reach people in places that I never would have otherwise because they just couldn't come in. And then you see so many therapy deserts throughout the country that really benefit from being able to go home and utilize their phone, utilize their Wi-Fi access, and meet with somebody that can support them. All right, I have not forgotten about simple practice for this month. Working with clients who have substance use disorder means documentation and captures clinical complexity, treatment planning, safety consideration, co-occurring disorder tracking. It can be a lot. Simple Practice is built for exactly this. All of it in one HIPAA compliant platform designed specifically for mental health clinicians. The new Care Aid feature makes the documentation side faster so you can spend more time on clinical work. This is what we need. We need more tools that are going to help us get through the administrative work as quickly as possible so we can get on to the care work as quickly as possible. So take a look at Simple Practice. I'll have a link in the show notes. They have all sorts of free trial things that you can do this month to give it a try. All right, let's get into our topic today. We're going to start with the DSM-5 criteria for substance use disorder. The DSM-5 made a significant change to how substance use disorders are diagnosed. The old DSM-4 divided these conditions into two separate diagnoses, substance abuse and substance dependence. The DSM-5 merged them into a single diagnosis, substance use disorder, on a severity spectrum. One diagnosis, 3 severity levels. Severity is determined by how many of the 11 criteria are present. So let's go over the 11 criteria really quick. They're organized into 4 clusters. The first cluster is impaired control. So the first part of impaired control, number 1, taking the substance in larger amounts or for longer than intended. 2, persistent desire or unsuccessful effort to cut down or control use. 3, spending a great deal of time obtaining, using, or recovering from the effects. 4, craving a strong desire or urge to use. That's the first cluster, impaired control. The next cluster is social impairment. So we go right into, this goes into 5, failure to fulfill major role obligations at work, school, or home. 6, continued use despite persistent social or interpersonal problems caused or worsened by use. 7, important social, occupational, or recreational activities given up or reduced. That's the second cluster, so social impairments. The next cluster is risky use. So we go right into 8, recurrent use in situations where it is physically hazardous. 9, continued use despite knowledge of persistent physical or psychological problems caused or worsened by use. Then the next cluster, pharmacological criteria. 10, tolerance, needing markedly increased amounts to achieve the desired effect or markedly diminished effect with the same amount. 11, withdrawal characteristics, withdrawal symptoms, or using the substance to relieve or avoid withdrawal. So with that, you get severity levels, mild, moderate, severe. 2 things worth knowing for the exam. First up, the DSM-5 explicitly notes that tolerance and withdrawal criteria do not count toward the diagnosis when the substance is taken solely as prescribed. A patient taking opioid pain medication as prescribed who develops tolerance is not meeting those criteria diagnostically. Second, the specifier in early remission means no criteria met for 3 or to 12 months. In sustained remission means no criteria met for 12 months or longer. On maintenance therapy and in controlled environments are additional specifiers worth knowing. Okay. All right, so that's going to be it for what the DSM-5 is looking at right now with substance use. Let's get into Proshka and DiClemente's. So this is the trans-theoretical model. You need to know this for the test. This is absolutely going to be on there. It has been in every NC I've taken. So know this one. And I use this all the time for so many different things. Everything from healthy lifestyle creation to substance abuse to eating disorders, just name it. I use trans-theoretical model. James Proshka and Carlo DiClemente developed the model by studying how people change addictive behavior, both with and without formal treatment. What they found was that change is not an event, it's a process, which makes sense, right? Like people, I've never, I've had a very, very, very small percentage of individuals that have been able to come into session, flip a switch, and they change like the thing that they're trying to address, whether it be some type of addictive behavior or whatever. This is a process. This is something that has, a long-term beginning and end. So, we have to be able to evaluate for these different stages. So the first stage is pre-contemplation. The person is not currently considering change. They may not see their use as a problem, or they may have given up on the possibility of change after previous failed attempts. The clinical signal: the client who comes to treatment because someone else sent them. The client who says, I don't have a problem, or I've tried before and it doesn't work. I've seen this a lot. People get sent to therapy from their loved ones, from their boss, and they just don't quite see what the problem is. Because, especially if somebody identifies like as a functioning alcoholic, a functioning drug user, whatever, they just don't see it. Like they're like, well, I still get my work in on time. Like maybe every once in a while I'm hungover, or maybe every once in a while I forget something, but it's no more than anybody else. Like they're just not convinced that they have a problem. Next up, the contemplation stage. A person is ambivalent. They can see both the benefits and the cost of their use. They are thinking about change, but have not committed to it. The clinical signal: I know I should probably cut back, but this is a great place for motivational interviewing. Actually, a lot of what I was taught was using motivational interviewing along with this trans-theoretical model. So the clinical task in the contemplation stage is exploring and resolving ambivalence, motivational interviewing. The goal is not to push toward action, but to help the person work through the genuine competing forces that are keeping them stuck. So, we're getting them. We're getting them to that next place, or supporting them and them getting themselves to that next place. Stage 3, preparation. The person has made a decision to change and is preparing to take action in the near future. Typically within the next 30 days, they may be gathering information, telling others about their plan, or taking small preliminary steps. The clinical task here in preparation: helping the person develop a concrete, realistic change plan, building the commitment, identifying potential obstacles. I love when people get to this place, and it's really kind of, it's something that you really have to watch for, because, it's easy. It's easy to go from contemplation to preparation and then fall back to contemplation. And all of these, like you see people. That's why this is a process. This is not a straight line. This is not a guide to how to change people or how people change. This is suggesting different, mind places people get into that help them toward change, or that shows they're working toward change. The next stage, stage 4, is the action stage. The person is actively modifying their behavior. In this stage, is the most visible to the outside world. This is when people will comment on the changes that the person is making. The clinical task here is supporting the person through the active change process, building skills, problem solving, obstacle reinforcement, commitment. Stage 5, this is going to be the maintenance stage. The person has made the change and is working to sustain it and prevent relapse. Maintenance begins at 6 months of sustained change. Relapse prevention, the clinical task here is relapse prevention, identifying high-risk situations, building coping skills, and sustaining motivation over time. One of the things that's really important about this stage is trying to support the individual and not letting them helping them to reframe any setback as failure. So you'll see people, like, let's take alcohol, for instance. Somebody wants to go sober. They are doing well for several months. They have a wedding. They go to the wedding. They have a couple glasses of champagne. they come back into session, they see themselves as a failure, that they've had this streak for so long and they went to this wedding and they, in this moment of weakness, they screwed everything up. And that's not what we're talking about here. That is not a relapse. That is not a failure. And we have to support the individual on seeing that this is part of the process. This is trial and error. This is understanding and knowing better about these different situations. And that's the thing with, especially like that first year, I see with people is you need to support this idea that there's going to be a lot of trial and error. There's going to be weddings. There's going to be holidays. There's going to be just events where they get together with friends and family where drinking has been a thing up to that point, and they're going to have to figure out how to navigate it. And if navigating it means they had a drink or two, then that can be explored. Let's take a look at it, but it's not a failure. And that really is one of the places that you really can support people around. All right, so now we're going to get a little bit more into the treatment approaches. So as mentioned, motivational interviewing, it's going to be one of the ones that I highly recommend. The spirit of motivational interviewing, that partnership, acceptance, compassion, evocation, the core techniques, OARs, change talk, rolling with resistance, they're directly applicable to the substance use treatment. On the exam, when a question describes a client's ambivalence about change, if you ever see that word ambivalence, it's going to be motivational interviewing. Like that's where they're going with it. So, be on the lookout for that. Cognitive behavioral therapy for substance use, CBTI, or I'm sorry, not CBTI. I was talking to somebody earlier about CBTI. Sorry. That's cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So cognitive behavior therapy for substance use, CBT for substance use. And another one, like you're going to be using, seeing this a lot. It identifies the thoughts, feelings, and situations that trigger use and builds skills for managing those triggers differently, particularly useful in action and maintenance stages. So, functional analysis use, things like that. I use a smattering of the behavioral approaches. So I really, really like DBT, and I like REBT a lot as well. And, they're all under these behavioral therapy approaches. So I combine them a lot. I like the mindfulness that DBT emphasizes, a lot of the thought stopping and reframing that just, vanilla CBT offers. Then we have the 12-step facilitation, connecting clients with AA and NA, other 12-step programs. They complement the treatment. And, they do. Like, I've had a mixed bag with AA and NA. It works so well for so many individuals. But if you have an individual that, where, spirituality, especially like Catholicism and Christianity just isn't like really a big part of their lives, it can be a little difficult. Yes, AA and NA have you look for a higher power, and they say that a higher power can be anything for anybody, but it does. It tends to lean toward more like Christian and Catholic. So it does. It really works extremely well for a certain group of people. But you also have things like Smart Recovery, the Sinclair method, OAR, that's online recovery programs, community support, they're just general community support programs. So, there are so many aspects of AA that, they've given us this amazing foundation, and people have grown other programs out of it. The big piece with AA that I just absolutely think is amazing is the community that it creates for people. It does really, really well for community. And that is, it is like, that is one of the things that people struggling with substance use really need. Substances have a way of isolating people, and that isolation can really add to their use. So getting them out, getting them around other individuals, especially other individuals that have similar experiences to them, is only going to help. Of course, you also have the different medications that are out there. Team up with a psychiatrist. that is That is one of your first assignments after you become a therapist is get your team together. I work with psychiatrists, nutritionists, personal trainers, like all sorts of other people that I can refer to pretty quickly. Highly, highly recommend getting yourself on a team with some psychiatrists. It is awesome. Lastly, harm reduction model. This one is pretty straightforward. This approach accepts that some people are not ready to be able to achieve abstinence immediately. So the focus becomes just reducing the harm that the substances cause. I follow the harm reduction model with most of the substance use, every pretty substance use person that I work with. That's kind of like the first step for me. The first intro is how do I get them to a place to just decrease the harm that this substance is causing to them as much as possible. Really quick in this section, I want to go into some of the co-occurring disorders. There's 3 patterns that are really worth knowing for the exam. So first up is the self-medication hypothesis. The person uses substances to manage psychological disorders, depression, anxiety, trauma symptoms. The substance provides temporary relief over time and creates its own problems and often worsens the underlying condition. People will come to you with the problems that substance abuse has resulted in their lives. And when you start to dig into what they have gone through, you start to see pretty quickly that the substance use solved a problem for them early on, whether it be struggling with depression, struggling with anxiety. I mean, how many times have you experienced this yourself or heard somebody say this, something along the lines of, well, I just drink as social lubricant. I mean, that's, there could be some anxiety there, right? Because it tends to get generalized. Like people will start using it for social lubricant and it works there. And they're like, oh, this helps calm my nerves for a test. And then, oh, this helps calm my nerves for this and this and this. And it just builds and builds and builds until the substance becomes the problem that they were trying to solve. So one of the things when we start to address the substance use, and especially as people start to reduce their substance use, those issues, the anxiety, the depression, the trauma comes back up because they've been treating it with alcohol. So a lot of the times you'll see people that get rid of the alcohol, get rid of the substance, and start struggling with the trauma that they've had in their life, the anxiety that they've had in their life. That's why this is a process. That's why it's so important for us to provide support. Another issue we're going to see here, substance-induced disorders. This is where prolonged substance use can produce mood, anxiety, and psychotic symptoms that mimic primary psychotic disorders. A critical clinical and diagnostic skill is to be able to distinguish between substance-induced symptoms from a primary mental health disorder. You will see a lot of the disorders in the DSM say something along the lines of in the absence of alcohol. So, it is like depression, you can't, or, let's say bipolar 2, bipolar 1, a lot of them will say, we'll give this whole list of things, and then they'll say, as long as alcohol isn't present, or something along those lines, because it's extremely difficult to diagnose some of these things as like definitely bipolar 1, definitely bipolar 2, definitely depression, definitely anxiety, in the presence of alcohol, because alcohol can cause so many different things, so many different issues that you need to be able to kind of clear the space a lot of the times before you can say for sure what something is. So just keep that in mind. In the next section, I'm going to go into what substance use actually looks like in the clinical room. So let's do just a little scenario here. A 38-year-old client comes to you following a DUI. He's been court ordered to attend counseling. He doesn't believe he has a problem. He drinks, he says, because of the stress of his job and his marriage, and everyone he knows drinks as much as he does. He is in the pre-contemplation stage. Not denial as a character flaw. Pre-contemplation as a stage, a place in a process, a place with a clinical approach matched to it. We don't argue with him about whether he has a problem. You don't list the consequences of his drinking. You don't set a goal for abstinence in the first session. You get curious. You ask about the things that matter to him, his job, his marriage, his sense of himself as a person. And then gently without agenda, you invite him to notice the places where his drinking might be creating distance between where he is and where he wants to be. If you remember I'm pretty sure just in the previous podcast, definitely something I've spoken about before, so much of what we're doing in therapy is aligning people with the person or the lives that they really want for themselves, that they really want for their world. We're helping them align. So with this individual, he's saying, hey, people are telling me this is getting in the way. And we want to invite him to consider, well, what do you want? What do you want? And how do you see this substance use impacting your world? So 3 things to really lock into. 1, know all 11 DSM-5 criteria organized by cluster. The impaired control, social impairment, and risk use, then pharmacological. Also keep in mind that severity is determined by count. So 2 to 3, 4 to 5, or 6 or more. So these are the criteria, correct? 2, know all 5 stages of change by a behavioral description and clinical intervention. The exam will describe a client's attitude and readiness and ask what the clinician should do, match the stages to the intervention. 3, know the integrated treatment model for co-occurring disorders. Simultaneous treatment is the standard of care. Keep in mind that sequential models, so models that promote sobriety first, then mental health, or vice versa, are no longer supported by evidence. So important. And this used to kind of be the way that, in order to get treatment, you had to be sober first. So no longer a thing. On your exam, any answer that requires a client to achieve sobriety before addressing their mental health condition, that's almost certainly wrong. How about some multiple choice questions? Question number 1. A client reports drinking alcohol daily, has tried to cut back multiple times without success, spends most of his evening drinking, has called in sick to work several times due to hangovers, and has stopped playing golf. An activity he previously loved because it interferes with his drinking, which a lot of golfers would tell you that golf does not interfere with drinking. His wife has told him his drinking is destroying their marriage, and he acknowledges this is true, but continues to drink. According to the DSM-5, how many substance use disorder criteria does this client meet, and what is the severity level? Is it A, 3 criteria, mild substance use disorder; B, 4 criteria, moderate substance use disorder; C, 5 criteria, moderate substance use disorder; or D, 6 criteria, severe substance use disorder? Answers are going to be C, 5 criteria, moderate substance use disorder. Let's count them. Unsuccessful efforts to cut back, criteria 2. Spending a great deal of time, criteria 3. Failure to fulfill major role obligations, work absence, criteria 5. Giving up on important activities, golf, criteria 7. Continued use despite interpersonal problems, his marriage, criteria 6. That's 5 criteria. 4 to 5 criteria equals moderate. This is a frequently tested question format. The exam will describe a clinical scenario and ask you to count the criteria and assign the severity. Question number 2. A client who was referred by his employer following a positive drug test tells his counselor, "I don't really think marijuana is a problem for me. Everybody I know smokes. My boss is overreacting. He expresses no intention to change his use." According to the transtheorical model, this client most likely is in which stage of change, and what is the most appropriate clinical response? Is he in the contemplation stage? The counselor should explore his ambivalence about change. Is he in the preparation stage? The counselor should help him develop a change plan. Is he in pre-contemplation? The counselor should raise awareness of discrepancies between his values and his behaviors without confrontation. Or lastly, D, is he in the action stage? The counselor should provide relapse prevention skills. Answer is going to be C, pre-contemplation, right? He is denying that this is even a problem. The client sees the problem with his use as, not that big of a deal. That is one of the defining features of pre-contemplation. The appropriate clinical response is to not argue, lecture, or present the consequences, all of which are likely to increase resistance. This is such a good point here. So many people will come to you with this issue, with this exact same scenario that was just described in this question. And they've already heard from everybody else in their life the consequences, what's going to happen, all the stuff. And we do, that's not our job. We need to step out of that and show them that this is different, that this is a professional environment, that we're not here to judge, that we're here to support them and their needs. All right. Question number 3, a client with opioid use disorder is interested in medication-assisted treatment. Her counselor explains that one option is a medication that is partial opioid agonist, meaning it activates opioid receptors, but to a lesser degree than full agonist, reducing cravings and withdrawal symptoms while having a ceiling effect that limits euphoria. This description most accurately describes which medication. Would this be methadone, a full opioid agonist, naproxolone, a opioid agonist that blocks opioid receptors, buprenorphine, a partial opioid agonist with a ceiling effect, or disulfiram, a aversive agent used for alcohol use disorder? Man, those are not easy to pronunciate. Take a second. The answer for this is going to be C, buprenorphine. Buprenorphine is a partial opioid agonist. It activates opioid receptors but produces a weaker effect than full agonists like methadone or heroin, and has a ceiling effect that limits the potential misuse. It significantly reduces cravings and withdrawal. Methadone is a full opioid agonist, while naproxone is an agonist. It blocks opioid receptors entirely, producing no opioid effect at all. Question number 4. A client presents with symptoms of both major depressive disorder and alcohol use disorder. The treatment team is discussing the sequencing of treatment. According to the current evidence-based practice, which approach is most appropriate for this individual? Is it A, treat the alcohol use disorder first? Depression symptoms will resolve with sobriety. B, treat the depression first. Substance use will decrease once an underlying condition is addressed. C, treat both conditions simultaneously. Integrated treatment produces better outcomes than sequential approaches. D, refer to a psychiatrist for medication management before beginning counseling for any of this stuff. Answer is going to be C, the integrated treatment model. Addressing substance use and mental health conditions simultaneously is the current standard of care for co-occurring disorders and is consistently supported by research. Sequential models that require sobriety before addressing mental health or vice versa are no longer evidence-based practice. Question number 5. A client is recovering from alcohol use disorder and has been sober for 8 months. During a particularly stressful period at work, she begins drinking again. She comes to her next week's session visibly distressed and ashamed. According to the trans-theoretical model, which of the following most accurately characterizes this event, and what is the most appropriate clinical response? Is it A, the client has failed at recovery and should be referred to a higher level of care? Is it B, the client has returned to the pre-contemplation and the therapeutic relationship should be reestablished before addressing the relapse? C, relapse is a normal part of the change process. The client has most likely returned to the contemplation or pre-contemplation stage. The clinical task is to help recommit to change without shame. Or D, the client should be confronted directly about the relapse to break through their denial. Answer is going to be C. Trans-theoretical model explicitly frames a relapse not as a failure, but as a normal, expected part of the change process. Most people cycle through the stages multiple times before achieving sustained change. A relapse typically returns the person to an earlier stage, usually contemplation or pre-contemplation, rather than way back to pre-contemplation. Oh, I'm sorry, contemplation or preparation rather than all the way back to pre-contemplation. That makes more sense, huh? I cannot stress this enough, and I know I've already said it. Do not want to beat a dead horse necessarily, but it is so important to not shame the individual for this and feed into the shame that they already have for themselves. Just recognizing this as part of the process, recognizing is this as, you know, a learning moment for this person. That's going to be the way to go. 3 takeaways from this episode. 1, know all 11 DSM-5 criteria for substance use disorders, organized by their 4 clusters: impaired, control, social impairment, risky use, and pharmacological. Severity is determined by count: 2 to 3, mild, 4 to 5, moderate, 6 or more, severe. No intolerance and withdrawal don't count toward diagnosis. 2, know all 5 stages of change by behavioral description and by clinical interventions. That matches each stage. Pre-contemplation gets awareness, raising without confrontation. Contemplation gets ambivalence exploration. Preparation gets a change plan. Action gets skill building. Maintenance gets relapse prevention. The match matters. 3, co-occurring disorders are treated simultaneously. Integrated treatment is the evidence-based standard. Sequential models requiring sobriety before mental health treatments are no longer supported. So in the newsletter this week, I'm going to go deeper on CAGE and audit screening, alcohol and opioid withdrawal syndromes, and ASAM levels of care. You're going to see, especially on the NCMHCE, you're going to see a lot of the assessments for substance use. So like I know the CAGE and the audit do come up. So that's going to be important pieces to know, and that, you know, I'll do deeper dives in the newsletter. Don't forget to take a look at the new redesigned website. I would love some feedback on that. You can hit me up at licensurelifeline@gmail.com. That's also a great place to send me any questions. There is a feature on the Buzzsprout, you know, the host for my podcast that lets you send messages to me. I can't respond to those messages, so make sure you do it through the email or you do it through Instagram. Also, take a look at the Circle group. 2 weeks free, no credit card needed. It's a great place just to get a little extra support and really frame things better. All right, until next time, folks, never stop learning. Take care.